G'day, I'm David Richards.
And I'm Paul Luckett. Welcome to the first episode of Media Tech Talk, a series where we bring you the best minds in media technology to have interesting conversations about what's shaping the industry, discuss key trends and insights from around the world with a focus on Australia, and learn from them what it takes to be a leader in today's digital media landscape.
And between the two of us, we have 50 years of media experience. Luckett, you and I have worked at a couple of publishers. I've had the great opportunity to work with some broadcasters on radio and print over the years. And I think between the two of us, we've got some really great contacts to bring into Media Tech Talk.
Yeah, working in media for 15 years across technology, operations, product strategy, building cool programmatic solutions, and then recently launching Luckett Media Consulting. We've met so many awesome and insightful people and frequently have these, really interesting conversations with thought leaders. So we had this great idea to take those conversations and turn them into a podcast. So I'm really excited to kick this off and see where it takes us.
Yeah, me too. And what a great way to lead into today on Media Tech Talk. We're actually joined by one of the leading voices in Australia's digital media landscape. JJ has spent more than 8 years at the Interactive Advertising Bureau Australia, or better known to us as the IAB Australia, helping shape the standards that underpin how digital advertising is measured, traded and trusted. Under his guidance as the technology lead, the IAB Australia has grown to nearly 190 members, engaged over 350 professionals through councils and working groups, and delivered more than 1,800 e-learning modules in a single year. And he's influenced national policy with 8 government submissions. From expanding education and mentoring to pioneering frameworks in privacy, connected TV and artificial intelligence, JJ has been at the heart of progress. Really, I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, absolutely. So get ready for an inspiring conversation about leadership, innovation, and the future of digital media.
JJ, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you as our first guest on Media Tech Talk. Now, JJ, you've been at the IAB Australia since 2017 as its technology lead. And after 5 years on the board before that? What was it that drew you into the organisation, and what kept you inspired to help shape the industry for so long?
Well, look, first of all, thank you both. It's lovely to be here and be involved on Media Tech Talk. I'm looking forward to this. Well, I mean, like most of my career, it's all stumbling around a little bit, having brought over to Australia by a business called REA Group, which was a great joy to work there for 5 years. Part of the responsibility was to sit on the board. I had been involved in IAB bits and pieces in the UK in the past. So sort of got a feel and sort of vibe for the collaboration of it all and everyone getting in a room. And I really enjoyed the networking naturally within sort of digital media and the technology game, particularly as Programmatic opened up. It was really quite critical. So it's from 2017, I actually started consulting. I wasn't too sure what to do. So I was like, right, let's do some bits and pieces. And had spoken to the CEO at IAB Australia at the time, Vijay, who said, I'd love to have you for a day or two a week to get directly involved in certain projects and get under the skin of some of the working groups and particularly some of the specs and standards coming out from the US and also other markets. So that started a relationship which culminated in me now working full-time as I did almost 5 years of consulting, and it was sort of fun. I'm not too sure how I carried it off, to be honest, but I really enjoyed it. Somehow kept my head above water and the rules from the door, and having that consistent relationship with IAB Australia throughout made me realize that was actually what I wanted to do out of the myriad of bits and pieces I was up to. So doubled down and have been working full time for the last few years. But yeah, ostensibly been involved with IAB Australia fairly directly since I landed on these sunny shores back in 2012.
Looking back, what moments or mentors stand out for you for shaping your career as a leader today?
Oh,
big question.
That's an interesting question. I'd actually say, I love the mentoring side of it, and we have a very strong program at IAB Australia. Now, I'm not sure, back in the day, if I'm honest, been involved in this 25, 26 years, that peer mentoring where we'd sort of support one another was very important and very common. I'm not sure I ever had one sort of wise older owl take me under his or her wing necessarily, but I was probably most inspired by some of the people I worked very closely with at startups. First 10 years in the UK was actually startups, from working out of a flat in London with a handful of people building out a website that we wanted to monetize. We even built our own ad server. I have to say, I think on a commercial level, the founder of that business remains one of the most intelligent, smart, and sort of digitally savvy people I've ever met. And seeing him grow that business, he didn't do it alone, obviously, but we'd gone from like literally 4 people to over 130 by the time I left. That was quite inspiring to see, his energy and his smarts and the way he allowed people to have autonomy and prove themselves. And at the same time, if you weren't up to scratch, there was constructive feedback, and I took a lot away from that experience.
Do you think that shaped your future leadership skills and style, and how you would like to be perceived and work in professional, and obviously within the IAB Australia as well?
A little bit, in terms of there is that positivity that I think's required often in our industry. Every sort of quarter, we're all in a bit of a panic about something, and then we're all overexcited about something else. But being able to take up the opportunities and figure them out with real curiosity is something I definitely took away from that experience. And at the same time, I'd say the core technical individual that sort of underpinned everything, just from realizing the strength of someone who really knows what they're doing. And it wasn't applying knowledge that it learned in an educational environment. It was just sheer nous curiosity and a willingness to roll up one's sleeves and figure stuff out. And I think those two kind of influences on me did have probably underpinned a lot of what the way I've approached things, both sort of when I was in management, but also trying to undertake, various projects with groups of volunteers, where it is a bit like herding kittens. That you need just a bit of relentless and persistent positivity to keep things moving along.
Anyone who knows you, JJ, knows exactly how you pulled off your continued contributions at IAB. You've become that wise owl in this industry. I think you're probably one of the key figures in the Australian media market, and you definitely have been that for me, being a friend and a mentor over the years. Taking a little bit of this, well deserved. Taking a step back a little bit, for people out there who might be less familiar with the IAB, how would you explain the IAB Australia's role in the Australian digital ecosystem, and what is its true purpose?
Yeah, so the IABs are kind of interesting. It's almost like a franchise model. So it's Interactive Advertising Bureau, which shows how long ago it was established, utilizing the word interactive, and even bureau, rather dramatic term. But there are actually 46 different IABs around the world. So the latest one was Ecuador, who launched literally a couple of months ago. So the concept being that within each market, you've got guidance that's relevant to that particular market in terms of measurement, best practices, standards, and each one sometimes has a slightly different focus. IAB Europe, for instance, are very focused on policy, reg affairs, sitting in Brussels, GDPR. It's kind of worked out that way. The UK have real strength around particularly sort of commercial and working closely with government. So we lean a lot on them for some of those things. And they got a bit stronger recently in tech, which is great to see. And the US is quite a behemoth actually within the industry. So for us, the role that we play here is particularly in and around all things measurement. So we have an established industry currency, which we work with collaboratively with a measurement council from all the major suppliers in the industry. And every 5 years, we'll vendor out or RFP out for a vendor to underpin those metrics. And then the obligation is to steward that and ensure that it's accurate and objective and meeting the requirements of industry. It's obviously not the only one in town, but we still feel that's a critical obligation to provide that objective measurement for Australia, and we're one of the few markets that still provides that. And then, the best practices in and around all things standards. I take the lead on product. We've got a really strong research, arm. It's really someone called Nat Stanbury, who's an absolute gun in that area, incredibly experienced. Just produced sort of a triple M paper that's really getting great feedback, for instance. So we try and focus on what we feel is important for industry locally. We're guided by our board, who give us direction, and it's highly representative in terms of tech companies, but also you've got some of the bigger platforms, but also some of the key publishers, as well as some of the vertical publishers. So it's a generally representative group that guide us in terms of what we should be focused on in both the short and long term. And then at a deeper sort of tactical level, I'm just going to keep talking now. It's become a soliloquy. We take real guidance from the working groups and councils. Daevid is co-chair of our AI working group, which is a big, excitable group that's got multiple work streams that we're trying to actually corral together, but that's great. So we take real guidance of the likes of Daevid and that group. And yourself, Paul, you've chaired standards and guidance in the past. You've sat on our exec tech in the past. You know that actually we take a lot of input from that group in terms of what we should focus on next. So it's not just sort of sitting in an ivory tower and deciding what's best for Australia. That's absolutely not the philosophy at all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look, I think the working group, obviously from the IAB's AI working group that I'm co-chairing with KC, has just been an amazing opportunity for me to get an insight into how, companies like Microsoft and Google and obviously the publishers and agencies are all grappling with AI, and we all are coming from the same angle. Actually, do you know what I say? It's more, we're all at the starting line together, and that's probably one of the most unique things I found out of this is that we're all so, I suppose, amazed and inspired and awed by what AI can do, but we're just saying, what is it? How we're all forming this from the foundation up, and you've got access to that at scale, JJ. That must be something pretty awesome to see from your point of view.
Oh, it's wonderful, and it's a real joy, and I think it's that aspect of the industry I always enjoyed from the very beginning. I mean, I must admit, I was sort of in platform for a good, probably 12 years, my first half of my career. And believe it or not, for the first half of those 12 years, I was sort of the quiet ops guy in the basement. Maybe not that quiet, but I sort of felt that was my place, and I really loved all of that. And then became a little, sort of burst out the box a little bit more and became a little more commercial, and probably more producty than commercial, if I'm honest, but certainly have done a fair amount of the hard yards on the revenue side of things. And I realized how important it was on the networking side of it. So that's something that came quite naturally to me and I enjoyed. And I remember working at one of the big ad networks in Europe. And during that period, this is sort of late noughties, towards the end of the late noughties, Programmatic had come in. Everyone was feeling this existential threat. And there was a lot of, from a commercial perspective, a lot of distrust amongst, say, the 2 or 3 big ad nets that were all feeling it. And it took me a while to realize this is not the right thing to do. So what I used to do, and I won't name names, but none of us would let the businesses know. We were the head of ad ops for each of those big ad nets. They're all supposed to be hating each other. We used to get together once a month for a lunch, swap notes, and just compare the successes and mainly the horror stories in terms of just survival. And that was sort of an early inkling into the way it should work, in my opinion. Plus, keeping across what's happening on the tech side, which is so important. And you can only do that by engaging, getting involved, trying to get under the hood of something, or even get your hands dirty with it, because you can't always believe what you're being pitched, let's face it. And you don't really know till you test it out. And that's something I kind of miss, actually. It's an important part of the industry, is being prepared to be open to what is possible, but also being able to pull out the the BS from what the way things are pitched. Actually, I used to enjoy seeing things pitched at me in different ways. Sometimes it's the same thing. You're like, wow, they pitched that a completely different way to that mob. That's quite fun. But it was only once you got your hands dirty with it when you realised whether it would work or not. And I think that's something you both know very well as well.
Very much so. I think regularly seeing pictures from vendors across the industry almost weekly, and I think just to see the comparison of what each vendor has to offer, and the different presenting styles are so important.
Oh yeah,
it's like these guys are in market to sell a product, and if they don't have the right sales skills and the product's awesome, there's less likely chance that it would take the product up as an opportunity to, or even go further past the discovery stage. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's funny, I still get that. I still get pitched at by vendors.
Is that right?
Some of them can't help it.
Yeah,
I think partly they want feedback, and I'm very happy to give that. And that's something, it's a privilege for someone to believe that your opinion's worthwhile. I remember even being in London, I popped over London's holiday and I happened to crash a media event. One of my old muckers, who just couldn't help it, after 2 minutes of pleasantries, was started pitching me. I was like, mate, I'm not even in this market. Can you calm down?
Hey, by the way, I've got an idea I want to pitch to you.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go.
I knew this would happen. Is it a podcast?
It's probably a good segue into obviously everything that you've been doing and everybody you come in contact with. What's the achievement that you're most proud of?
Oh,
that's a thinking question.
It's an interesting question. I think. Yeah. I think certainly going back to the startup period, the success of being part of a growth business, which went through some bumpy times. And another piece of interesting advice at the time from this entrepreneur was during the downturn, he believed that's when you rode harder as a challenger brand, because everyone else would freeze. And this was as long ago as actually 9/11. And I never forget the difference that made. That was a real growth period where we just took share from businesses that we didn't deserve to, and we worked hard and proved ourselves. So that's something I do remember rather nostalgically. I do think that I have enormous pride in the work I did in Australia for the first 5 years, building out what I felt was a very capable operational and programmatic team. The opportunity was there for me. I'd got the remit to change things, and it took a lot of persistence, a lot of patience. I learned a lot along the way, but I think I'm very proud of the way I left that business, both in terms of the culture of the people that had been arranged in particular teams, but also the technical capabilities that we'd managed to bring in and the revenue impact it was starting to have at a business that traditionally focused on a particular product and with a particular vertical, which to this day remains world class. But the ancillary opportunities, I think it was quite fun to surprise the business with what was possible, and to be able to put together a fairly diverse, really talented, hardworking couple of teams to enable that was something I look back on with genuine pride.
Getting kind of back to the networking point earlier, I think that I think there's a lot more that we can do to help people with that. I think there's, as you say, there are those people out there where it comes quite naturally, and then, to the people who don't, where it doesn't, that I kind of am like that, or used to be like that, when networking didn't quite come naturally. So
yeah,
it's something I'm thinking about a lot, of what can we kind of do to help with that. I know, I've got a lot of ideas on that, but you've got things like One Extreme and DigiDay Publishing Summit in the US, where they do their kind of speed dating-esque sessions where, you have the publishers who sit at the table, and this goes for an hour, and then the vendors are able to book 8-minute slots with those publishers. And so they come in, they do their pitch and everything. So that's an interesting way of doing it, but I think there's more that we can do there. But just getting back to kind of the IAB's purpose, I wanted to kind of ask you, with the US IAB and the Tech Lab, how does IAB Australia, what's the relationship there, and how do you work with those guys, particularly the Tech Lab?
Yeah, so it's worth, so where I was describing the 46 IABs that sit in market, what came out from IAB US probably around the time I landed here in Australia, because I think Tech Lab's now 11 years old, they were 10 last year, was to have a separate, fairly independently minded group that would oversee the specifications, standards, but and frameworks, but also some of it is software that has to be released, maintained, and iteratively updated. So take the core protocols of Programmatic, OpenRTB. That's something that's overseen by Tech Lab. They have some excellent product leads on the case there that will work with the various working groups and steering groups to ensure those protocols meet the standards and that there's collaborative inputs into how it's being improved in now. They used to do sort of big 6-monthly releases, and now it's quite iterative, sort of every 2 to 3 months, bits and pieces come out, and it's all open on GitHub, and it's a great way of doing things. You've got the video ad serving template, you've got open measurements, both which stems largely from an SDK, but that enables cross-media measurement, and it's a wonderful open source project where you have a whole host of highly competitive vendors working together in one SDK for the betterment ultimately of all. So you, as a utilizer of that SDK, get to provide this same common data to all of the vendors, and then your buying clients can pick and choose who they wish to utilize. It's just a smart, software open source driven approach to technical collaboration, which is so important. But I mean, there's over 20 to 25 different standards, some of which are as seemingly simple, but actually the backbone, a lot of what we do is just taxonomies, like nomenclature. Like, can you just call the same thing, please, and be consistent about it, which still actually remains a bit of a headache, to some really smart stuff they're doing around what they call advanced TV, connected TV, and even being able to release APIs to support live events and programmatic advertising within live events. There's a huge breadth of what that group does. So having a relationship with them has been great, and it's now being, I think they saw the opportunity with someone with a bit of product background on the other side of the planet to help amplify what they're doing and try and drive engagement in this region. So quite quickly established pretty good relationship with a few of the product people in particular. And Tony Katzer actually coming out again this year. He came out last year. He's coming again this November. He's the CEO, and he's really given some momentum and energy to an organization that was always quite diplomatic and trying to do the right thing and keep everyone happy. And Tony doesn't take prisoners, and I deeply respect the way he just wants to get things done, and he's really got them moving, and the breadth and depth of the work they do is so important. So I actually find a lot of what I'm doing day to day is amplifying the work they're doing and sort of digesting it and re-communicating it to industry here locally, and then trying to drive adoption for some of the more important projects.
I think one of the big things I've been, and please take this the right way, is when I talk to you and see you on with the working groups and the councils, is the breadth of knowledge that you have and your ability to articulate that clearly and in a way that people understand it. How do you do that? And is that just the natural part of the way you operate?
So yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I actually think, first of all, I could be disintermediated by artificial intelligence within minutes, right? But actually, I think that's actually my background. So a lot of the in-platform pseudo kind of techie work I was doing was actually more very strong learned behaviors where I had to figure it out myself. I did a hilariously pointless arts degree at university, which I absolutely loved. I learned things like Old Norse and Norwegian feminist literature. It made me less employable, if I'm honest, but it was at UCL, which is a great university, and I loved it. So I don't have a techie background other than being the classic nerd that started with a ZX80 in his bedroom 1K and was actually doing like little basic programs. So I suppose that's something I enjoyed, but I'm not an engineer or a techie at heart. So I've had to be able to interpret the more technical bits and then figure it out myself, because I'm not actually that deep technical engineering background. And I think that meant that I got then quite good at explaining it out. And certainly through the startup period, a lot of that just fell to me, because we either had the kind of hardcore techies, as it were, who I absolutely adored, or we had really hardcore commercial salespeople who just wanted to sell stuff. And I was sort of a lot of that glue in between. I basically almost ran like a product ops department, which for a while was just a department of one, which then grew. So I think that that's been a part of my background throughout. And I think that's something I even noticed it when consulting, actually, that quite a lot of the time it wasn't a particular I speak to people this quite a lot. It wasn't a particular area that I necessarily focused on in terms of defining what I should be doing for someone, which is kind of breaking all the rules of consulting, because I managed to have enough breadth to be kind of dangerous in enough areas to be able to have quite an open-ended conversation initially with people, and then would go in a certain direction, which sort of made it quite fun. But I think again, it goes back to that first half of my career being a bit of a scramble through a fast moving industry where you just had to be open minded and do a whole bunch of stuff. And some of that was even doing the books. I somehow got that startup through the first audit we did, where I learned so much. Actually understood how, to look at a P&L versus product versus helping sell stuff versus delivering stuff, all of that. So I think that's the bit of working at a smaller business too that gives you real breadth in terms of the different roles versus being at a larger organization in a specific role in a specific department where it's a bit more structured for obvious reasons.
What's the crystal ball look like for you when you focus that on the IAB Australia? Obviously today we're all AI and TV. Where do you see the IAB's role in the digital advertising space? In, let's say, I like 2030 because it feels like it's a long way, but it's not really. Where do you see it?
I don't think it changes because I know there's fundamental change happening now with the capabilities of AI, of course, and that's going to drive different consumer behaviors, and the capabilities are going to be supercharged. But we have, without being too blasé about it, we've seen versions of this in the past, and it's the same approach needs to be taken in terms of understanding what's possible, being able to produce short-term projects that you can lean into and see the outputs of and then build upon that. I love the sort of 2030 crystal ball concept, but the problem is that you end up living in that dimension, and it's a futuristic dimension that actually doesn't exist. And we can do that a lot in media, and actually particularly ad tech, right? Because you're generally working with a roadmap that's in development. And again, you only realize that once you get into it and you're like, right, so actually we can only do this currently, and you're working on that, and that's a North Star. Right.
I can't begin to tell you the number of roadmaps that I've thrown out the window just because they've literally changed.
But I love it because there is that emotionally creative bit that inspires us all. That's also part of the reason I do love the industry, because we're pretty, we're going to get there, but sometimes you get there a bit too early. I mean, I had the joy of actually being a head of Europe product role for a very short period of time at Videology. Now that business has gone bust, unfortunately, but back when I was with them, and this is like 2011, they were planning for connected TV then. I mean, the capabilities they were looking at are really only coming to adoption in the last few years. Whilst they did very well tactically within helping spend for one holding group in particular, their product thinking was actually, they were way too early. So you just got to be able to time it right in terms of what it looks like, which is why I suppose through our councils and working groups, such as the AI working group, which you help steer, David, it's ensuring that we can provide practical guidance with meaningful best practices in terms of here's what is actually possible, or at least plausible. Here's how we went about it as a form of sort of objective guidance without necessarily giving away the secret sauce. And that helps keep the train on the track towards, whilst we want to keep driving innovation, but it keeps it just a little more grounded. But notwithstanding, you still want to see the cool, sexy stuff, and you want to remain open to that in terms of what's potentially coming down the road. But you still need to be grounded in a bit of realism. But at the same time, be able to see some of those existential threats. It naturally becomes part of the role, particularly for the more senior groups like the board, the risk mitigation in terms of what's happening in the industry. Sometimes it's a talent issue, sometimes it's a privacy issue, sometimes it's a fraud issue. I mean, these are all key topics, transparency, that the exec tech council then may wrestle with and try to come up with resolutions for to help support industry. And I'd say for us here in Australia, when you look at the privacy regulation changes that we know will come, we're expecting it early next calendar year now. And that's a significant piece. Again, we can lean on the Europeans and the Americans, and Tech Lab have the frameworks for privacy, which is incredibly important. But then it's down to us to utilize it. That they're there for us to use as per the TCF in Europe, for instance, in terms of managing consent and all of that. So we know that's coming. So that's something that we can. That's a sort of known unknown that we can bank on and prepare for, which we are. And then secondly, I suppose with the changes that we're seeing in AI, taking the lead a little bit from Tony Katzer again at Tech Lab in terms of the existential threat of us already existing in an environment where the discovery piece or the engagement of consumers is starting in a different place, and it's disintermediating the natural advertising model for particularly your larger publishers, right? If they're going to see less attention, less eyeballs, less opportunity to monetize, so then what? So we're going to have a real focus on that next month with Tony. I'm really looking forward to that because Tech Lab have a couple of projects which are around enabling media owners in particular to take control of that, and think of it as building almost like a gate in terms of controlling the crawlers and allowing some in and some not, and that's supported by the likes of Cloudflare. But then that gives you some control and transparency over what's happening, and you can even build a revenue model, cost per crawl, for instance, and at least gives you an option. And we want to really focus on publishers and media owners for the rest of this financial year. We kind of made a call that the last 3/4 of this financial year will really double down on that and support media owners of all shapes and sizes, and try to get the smaller ones more involved, in particular the small to mids that need as much support, and obviously the large established publishers, which you both know very well, because it's important. It's the lifeblood of the industry.
JJ, I was talking to a vendor yesterday and they were talking about their capability to commercialize the bots, which I find fascinating. It's something I hadn't considered before for a publisher where they're losing eyeballs, and obviously AI GPT takes the search results away from their websites. I think that kind of technology that we wouldn't have thought about 12 months ago is starting to evolve, and we're seeing things that are brand new and conceptually almost sci-fi. Are you seeing a lot of that come through?
Absolutely, and that is actually the core project that Tech Lab have set up. So they had some initial specifications that would allow you to take control of that yourself if you wish to. I mean, I think speaking to a vendor and assessing what they can provide you makes sense too, because all the more learnings. It's funny, isn't it? Because we spent most of our time
blocking them.
Exactly. It's non-human traffic.
Now we want them.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got some foundational bits like spiders and bots, which is essentially an inclusion-exclusion of certain bots and crawlers, working out what's benevolent and what isn't. But now there's so many, and you've got to sort of, it's another whole range of different inclusions and exclusions. So it probably needs to be smarter than just including and excluding. Which does lend itself to a whole new layer of technology and solutions, because what will happen then. There'll be other iterative opportunities that come as a result of that, or potentially challenges. And you've got different approaches. So some of such as News Corp openly having a relationship with OpenAI, they got in early, and that's a commitment to what they see as the inevitable, and I think that's certainly smart for them. But not all organizations can do that, and then others may take a different approach and decide that they want to exclude any of their content from LLMs and take a different path. So it's a fascinating time.
Yeah, look, I think the commercializers of the bot and crawlers, if you like, provides a more democratic view for smaller publishers as well to participate in the revenue that AI can generate. And I think something that was really well said and it was resonating really well with me is that we can't stop AI from scraping pages and learning from the content that we've got online. Otherwise, AI basically will be limited to a small amount of information. That's obvious, but if we can find a way to commercialize it and make it valid for everybody, and we hear a lot about the music industry, trying to limit the way AI is using their content without paying a license fee. This literally could be a solution for it that could evolve into something bigger and a number of, if you like.
But then at the same time, given the importance of human attention and the monetization of that, we've worked so hard to be more responsible in that area in terms of addressability, provide insights such as attention metrics and viewability metrics to have that sort of qualitative side of it. If you're seeing a dramatic volume drop, it could just be band-aids that we're looking at, but at least you need to sort of see what those opportunities look like. So some of the guidance I'd love to provide in the next few months or so that comes from everyone, not necessarily just from one source or just seeing what's happening in other markets, is around the best practices in terms of content generation and how that's managed and even hosted on a page, and seeing some of the verticals doing really well, not just the big established ones, but also smaller, really hardworking sports verticals, entertainment verticals, where there's dynamic content coming out all the time that both the humans and machines will need to keep going back to. And I think that as a strategy that I'm already seeing starting to be employed by some of the smarter, really hardworking pubs. I like seeing that. I think that makes sense, and it's embracing the inevitable change that's coming and realizing that you have to sort of commit to a slightly different way of publishing versus just having static pages that sit there and can be ingested and cached and never returned to, unfortunately. So, and there's actually an element of nostalgia to some of this. I was thinking the other day that there were always quite clever products that I used to see around what these call zombie content, the content that would sit around that couldn't be accessed necessarily by all of the contextual suppliers or even by consumers. Whoops, I don't know what's up with my camera, sorry. I think getting bored of me and
it's all right.
Just fizz up to the corner. And actually surfacing that content in a smarter way and getting value out of it in a different way that may not necessarily involve human consumption is another interesting piece, depending upon the archive and library that you've got. And now that we're 30 years into the internet, there's probably a fair amount of that knocking around that has value that people aren't aware of, and that's something I've seen before. Interesting times.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's the conversation around content access control is an interesting one, as you say, is developing quite a lot, especially with e-com now and things like agentic AI coming into the picture and how that's changing everything, and instant shopping through AI platforms and how that's affecting certain groups. I think I heard the other day that Amazon was looking to take the approach of blocking these agents from being able to go on their pages, and because of the ecosystem the powerful ecosystem they've built out around their shopping. I guess zooming back a little bit to the crystal ball question, what do you see as kind of the key trends in 2026, and is it the year of mobile?
Oh God!
One day it will be the year of mobile.
Is it going to happen?
Yeah, is it a thing? I mean, actually, I have to say on that topic, if there's one thing I've worried about more recently, before I get to anything crystal ball like, is the lack of focus on in-app. So we sunset the Mobile Council back in the day. We even had a is mobile dead event, and we made it fairly democratic, and the decision was, yeah, it's now finally the year of mobile has arrived and it's part of everything, and things need to be done a bit differently, but then I think there's been a loss of focus on in-app. I mean, here in Australia we have a really high prevalence of iOS through Apple devices, and for marketing, both sellers and buyers, it's hard yards to really genuinely and efficiently and effectively monetize the traffic that we're seeing through in that environment. So I often think we should have an in-app working group and just have a focus on that. I still see, I have a few sources to go to where I need support on that particular topic, but for me, it feels like a real area that's seen as such a challenge that many businesses just kind of just give up on it. But to me, I think there's a massive opportunity there to really lean in and help enable that. So if I'd love to see a focus on something, it would be that. And it did come up actually in one of the councils recently. I reminded myself I did a bit of work with a particular vendor on it about a year ago, and I think I'd like to revisit that as a topic. So for next year, I think mentioning AI is fairly pointless because that's something to really bank on. But one of the standards that I've really enjoyed getting under the skin of, and it's one that's in play, is around live events. So something called the live event ad playbook. And it's only once I dug into some of the details and actually spent some time with someone from a vendor in India, which gave me another perspective, because you can focus around, say, the Super Bowl and a live event like that, which had almost 16 million concurrently connected devices at any one particular time. So the ability to provide a quality, low latency experience for the consumer for such an expensive event and key event like that is one thing. But when you add in the sort of the programmatic ecosystem to be able to enable all of that on a per device basis, just the level of effort and the query per second and the issues with even ads failing, but actually just that will be right back slate screen is really significant for businesses of all shapes and sizes, particularly the big broad. We're sports obsessed here in Australia. Our audience might not be that big, but increasingly we're online, we're streaming to higher spec screens, and the expectation for consumers is very high. So a project to help work out how to figure out and estimate the estimated number of devices concurrently connected at any one time, that's an API spec that's out. And then secondly, to be a bit more organized in terms of when these events are happening, what the timings are depending upon where you are in the world, what are the estimated number of viewers that may be or devices connected at any one time, so you can plan ahead for it. And then things like just the creative process is so clunky in terms of wrong formats, wrong specs, not happening quick enough. So you just can't plan ahead for the planned breaks, let alone the unplanned breaks that happen in sports, because there's a F1 car crash or someone calls a break, or I suppose here in Australia someone scores a goal, but which is fairly unplanned, but it depends upon how you're monetizing it. So that's an area that I think is fascinating. And I mentioned the India thing because IPL has almost 70 million concurrent devices at any one time streaming. Majority will be mobile, but that's another level.
Yeah, we'll actually be catching up with Tess O'Brien, Managing Director for ANZ at Freewheel, and I'm sure she's going to be sharing some amazing insights into how they programmatically stream ads into big live events, more specifically around NBC's broadcast for the Olympics. Really curious to hear how she plays in that space, or the technology, because you're right, there's a lot of decisioning going on, and data is providing the backbone for that. Obviously, we need fast connections and reliable connections. My brain just gets boggled when I think about the number of bits of technology that bring us
and the level of effort that's put on everyone as part of the process, because you're still going through the classic, request response basis back to the ad server, make the decision and spitting it and then stitching it into the stream. So a couple of things I've noticed is, so you've got the client side ad insertion, which is very traditional. Then server side SSAI is now far more prevalent, but there's now something called server guided, which feels like a hybrid of the two, which I've come across, and that's something that's quite interesting to see, because it's just naturally more efficient in terms of just the stitching of the ad into the stream. And then the really interesting bit of the playbook I was referring to was around how, and I think you do this with VOD already, you pre-fetch some of the bids. So you've got them ready, locked and loaded to go, because obviously with VOD, it's on demand. The volume isn't that high, and you can manage it. But there's a plan in place to be able to manage that for the sort of near real time process, where you've got a couple of seconds in which to respond, and to build that out to get a longer time window, so you can have banked a lot more based on RBT, RTB, real time bidding. That's a really fascinating one, and that's a really interesting project that could have some interesting ramifications for programmatic generally, in terms of giving buyers a little more time to respond, and the ad server a little more time to make a decision that it can then just sit there and be loaded in within, say, 30-second window rather than a 2-second window, at least for CTV.
This takes me back to my days of working back at Channel 7 Melbourne, 1990. I'm just showing my age a little bit now, but the ad playback delivery system was a carousel machine that would take it probably maybe about 6 or 7 meters long and about 2 meters high, 3 meters high, and it would hold a carousel. It was a carousel. It literally was a horse track shape of cassettes, like a mini shoebox. Each one of those would have an add-on. Yeah, and it was all vacuum. It was like a vacuum based machine. It would suck the tape unit in, obviously spool the heads would spool the tape and then play. But the presentation control operator would have to watch all the ads during the content play out. It was like a constant 24/7 process for them. They were it was just such a always on guard, always on go for making sure things played properly. And now here we are doing everything automated.
God, I should use that in a future presentation. I love having the old way things were done, because at the same time, with a live event, you still got to have someone actually press the button and say, "Here comes the opportunity! Quick, respond!"
Yeah. Whoops, I missed the button.
That isn't automated yet. Love that. I'm going to look into that, David.
Oh, I've got so many stories. JJ, I'm just obviously conscious of time. There is an element in your world that obviously we've been talking about mentoring and bringing people together and finding problems and then finding the right solutions for them. What would be the takeaway that you would give as some advice for somebody wanting to get into the industry, and to in your retrospect, what would you say is probably the best bit of advice you could give someone?
I think that element of curiosity is always important in an individual, particularly in it is a generally fast moving industry, and it kind of always has been, and that side of it's probably getting worse. And there's almost an emotional resilience that's required, because either that excites you, you find it fun, and you can cope with the idea of it's difficult to be a perfectionist in that environment, because things change so fast. You've only just delivered a project, you're like, oh, we have to iterate on it already, or something else has changed and I'm going off over here now. And either that excites you and you can, or if it doesn't, try and find your place where you find a little more stability in how you maintain things. And that often comes down to personality, and the networking side of it, that worked really well for me. And I remain a massive fan of, at our events, trying to get different groups of people together. We've run, probably our longest event is one we used to just call AdOps, that's now Ad Tech and Ops, which is basically everyone at the coalface doing all the work that normally don't get out and about too naturally, and it may not come naturally to them. And I hear what you're saying there, Paul. And I really think that's an important part of, particularly for those people in those particular roles or with that type of a personality, because there's a like-mindedness that they feel comfortable with. And I've noticed that the socializing post-event, that's the one where hardly anyone leaves, because they're all having such a great time just being in each other's company. But a lot of those individuals aren't the ones that would naturally seek out other people. So I adore seeing that. But the other thing is the real breadth in terms of the roles and experiences that you can have in it still feels like quite a small industry, right? The number of times I go up to Sydney and you bump into people, but you probably count, maybe it's sort of, I don't know, 1,500 in total, or maybe that's quite a lot. But if you think of, other industries, banking and insurance or other, it would be so much bigger. So you've got that sort of nice, smallish community. You can kind of cope with the numbers, and the range of opportunities you have in your career in terms of types of work, environments of work, culture of work is generally really, really broad. And sometimes I speak to people who are fairly new in the industry and they feel that they're stuck in a rut or they're in a little box and they don't know how to break out. And they honestly haven't often just been aware of what's happening in their own building, let alone the industry. But getting out and about and being a bit curious and doing cross-departmental initiatives and projects, which you can naturally do. And that does take a bit of bravery and proactivity that doesn't come naturally for everyone. But that's always stood me in good stead. And I always try and recommend that to people, even if it's sometimes a little challenging. But a lot of the stuff in life that is scary is the important stuff that you actually should go towards that fear rather than away from it. And then, as you say, the mentorship program is one. If there's one thing I'm probably proudest of that we've released, regardless of all the great work and projects and leveraging the standards we're seeing come out of the wonderful team at Tech Lab, is just a mentorship program. Over the last 5 years, we've had almost 500 mentees come through, the relationships that are established, and the concept being that you can form a high trust relationship with someone outside of your organization that may even have a completely different perspective to you, and you form a sort of a relationship that really helps. And that's something I've loved being involved with, and I'm really proud that we set up, and it's still thriving and doing so well.
That's great. JJ, IAB Australia's technology lead, thank you very much for sharing your story with us and the conversation on Media Tech Talk.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, JJ.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, JJ, for an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed that one. Any chance to chat with him is always a good time, and what a great guest to have one to kick this one off. So next time you wonder who's setting the standards for how digital media advertising is managed, from measurement to transparency to the rise of artificial intelligence, remember, JJ and IAB Australia are there to help write the playbook for the future.
Thanks everyone for watching and tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next time on Media Tech Talk.